Hi everyone, welcome to Comic-Con at Home. I'm Monty Michael Moore, and this panel is going to be on drawing and designing comic book characters in action. So we're going to talk a little bit later about anatomy and drawing the actual characters, as well as how to integrate that into potentially cover art, as well as sequential panels for comic book illustration. I have been going to Comic-Con ever since I came into the industry in 1993, so this would have been my 28th, 29th time attending Comic-Con in San Diego. And in 2001, I was one of the guests of honor. Since that time, I have worked in both comics and gaming for almost 30 years continually for some of the largest and smallest comic book and gaming publishers, both on the indie side of things, all the way to names you would know like Dark Horse, Image, DC Comics, and Marvel, Lucasfilm, and I've been honored to work on projects such as Magic the Gathering, Harry Potter games, Dungeons and Dragons, and a host of others. So I was invited to create a panel so that we could bring some of the programming to you viewers at home who are missing out this year in our year of the COVID pandemic. So safely from the studio here in Colorado, we're going to be talking about art and how to draw the comic book character in action. One of the things that I like to stress when I'm at a convention and artists come to me, younger artists usually, or people just starting out in their career, and they often say, oh, I have this idea for a character, or I would like to create my own comic book character. And that's great. That's the nucleus of all of comics, is telling your own stories and creating your own characters that you yourself get to guide and direct. And some of the important things that people don't often associate with the comic book character, doesn't matter if it's a superhero or a villain or a secondary character, is that they're all driven by the story and their backgrounds. Clark Kent and Superman is very different than Batman, who might be very different than Spawn. And so what's very important, in my opinion, is the originality and the creativity that you impart into your characters when you're creating them. So at the very simplest, if somebody says, oh, I want to create a comic book character, they might literally make a big drawn out list of superpowers that they have seen or read about in a comic book. They can fly, or they shoot fire from their hands, or they can turn invisible, or they have mental powers like Professor X. But in my opinion, that's been done quite a bit. And so I encourage those of you who want to create your own, really think about the story and their character and what defines them, what makes them different than other characters that we've seen. And the more original and fresh that character is, the more that your potential readers are going to be engaged and intrigued by that story, because they might think, wow, this character is really different than other characters that I've read or seen before. And I think that's one of the reasons why Todd McFarlane, when he created Spawn, was very different. It was an edgier, darker character that the fans of the time could really engage with, because it was very much the antithesis of, say, Superman, where you have this very, Boy Scout kind of rigid belief system, shall we say, that, didn't really budge too much. So when you're creating your comics book character, really think about their story, who they are, bring some of your own, I don't know necessarily about ideology, but bring some of yourself into your characters, because they will often resonate more with your readers when the information of backstory or some of the background that character has comes from a place of honesty, and you can relate some of yourself through your characters. And many of the greatest writers in comics and film have said that this is how you make your characters real and believable and grounded, even if they can do amazing superhero kinds of things. They all have also some frailties and some faults. You don't necessarily want to create a superhero or a villain who is pure superhero or pure villain, because they're not as intriguing as the one who is possibly torn by interior dilemmas or moral conflicts that they have. So that's an important part about creating the character, not just how they look. Then as you move into drawing the character itself, how can you make yours fresh? How can you make sure that your guy who you want to be kind of similar to Wolverine, because you like Wolverine, is different than Wolverine? Because we've seen characters with claws that come out or that are partly feral. And so you really have to dig deep to create the unique character. And again, I feel it's going to be more successful. As we move into this next section, we're going to talk about drawing the character itself. All right, we're here at the art table. We're going to start out with some thumbnail sketches up here across the top, where I can explore different angles and dynamics for the figure. And a thumbnail sketch is usually pretty rudimentary. Mine usually start out with kind of sketchy thin lines. So say I want to put a figure here that is kind of crouched down low. I usually start with the head. I might just kind of indicate the body. Maybe one leg is kicked out way over here and the other one is up in front of them. And you want to keep these really fast and simple. Here's the center character, the center mass of the character. Sometimes I'll indicate part of the rib cage right here, and maybe the character's got a gun up by their head. And when you're doing these really quick dynamic sketches, doesn't really matter too much of the detail. You're not trying to impress anybody. These are for getting the overall flavor of what's going to work for a specific piece of art. So this is more of a crouched pose here. As we've got a really quick thumbnail, just takes a couple of seconds. Then maybe we'll try another one where the character is jumping through the air. So I might put the shoulders across there, again come in part of the rib cage. A lot of times I use a combination of circles and squares. Maybe the leg is coming up here, and this is more of a jumping pose where the bottom part of the leg is shooting down here, and one set of arms is up here in the back, and then the other one is pushing out, maybe even towards the viewer, their hand. So you can see that with just real basic lines, we start out. You can put in more details if you need, but if you're just doing a quick action type pose, you really don't need more than this, because you're going to be able to figure out what appeals to you best as the artist for what your needs are. Is this a pinup pose? Is this something that's going to go into an action panel? Or is it more of a storytelling element where you really need dynamic foreshortening, right? So if I did another drawing up here that was maybe the head is a lot bigger and we see just part of the shoulders and then the body is going away and it's more of a flying pose, then all these elements here are going to be just a lot bigger. But until you get more details into it, a lot of time you might not know as the artist, well, hey, what am I looking at here? Are these feet? And that's when you have to start deciding and putting in more of the details of the figure so that you're getting the directionality of what the figure is doing. So for example, if we move over here where we put a couple of head sketches, I want to start out with just a couple of ovals, and we can see the difference between some of the direction lines of making a head look different directions, up or down. So in the basic head shape, a lot of times, artists kind of divide it into thirds, and you've got basic proportions, and there's a lot of great art books out there that discuss these kinds of elements when it comes to drawing a face. And with just a few lines, we can make that face frown. We could put a little shadow for the nose. If the eyes are have the brows coming down closer to them, then that character is going to immediately look more stern or sincere. And then the face starts taking shape from there very quickly, and we've already got the beginnings of a head. And you can turn that into a variety of characters. But if we have the exact same oval over here, and we put those items in different areas, now we're already starting to work with foreshortening, because this over here is going to be the top of the head, and the eyes and the nose. There's going to be very little room left for the mouth and other elements. So now we've immediately got a character that is looking down instead of looking directly at us because we have so much head up here. So you might think, well, how does that play into the Action Comics character? But every element of the body, depending on how much you're showing and how close it is to the viewer, all plays into the effectiveness of what your drawing is for that character. It doesn't matter whether it's Iron Man or anybody else. So if we bring the jaw and the neck up and we move the nose way up here to the top and the mouth here and then the eyes looking upwards, we change the whole angle. Even though we still started out with basically the same sort of shape, we can just kind of continue to refine this drawing, and it turns into something very different once you decide where this character's looking, where the eye line is, where the ears are. We move those down. It tilts the head backwards so that the character then looks like they're looking up. And again, we started out all the same, and now we've got different things. So when you start applying that towards a fully rendered piece that is more drawn out of the figure, then you start getting a more action-oriented comic book drawing. So we're going to move to a couple of sketches here that I'm going to show two different approaches to drawing out the action character. And I might not get super detailed with them, but we're going to do an action pose that's going to be Snake Eyes from Cobra, right? He's a really cool kind of tactical ninja, and he has, he embodies this sort of, dark comic book character. But the reason why I want to do two different drawings is just to show two different approaches, maybe with, over here on this side, we're going to put circles, and over on this side, we're going to put polygons. And a polygon, if you know what a polygon is made up of not just squares, but they're actual more like cubes, right? So this could show one way to look at this could be a forearm, or this could represent a head. Whereas when we're dealing with circles and spheres, you can also build a human figure this way. And instead of the arm being a polygon like this, which has a plane to it, just like my arm here, we can see how it's twisted, is that if I draw this like a cylinder, like you would a pipe, then all these shapes can be used to create the human form. So we're going to draw a real similar kind of pose for Snake Eyes. It's going to be an action pose where he's kind of jumping towards the viewer, and we're going to do two different approaches as we go. And that way we can see the circles versus the polygons. And these are the two main ways I've seen different artists draw the human figure, and we've already done some demonstrations up here of using lines. Now, there's very few artists who just come in and start drawing outlines and things. Almost everybody builds the figure based on these kinds of rudimentary things. So I'm going to start out with a circle, and I'm going to start out with kind of a polygon. That way, this can be the head for both of the drawings that are going to be similar. So we want the Snake Eyes character. We're going to tilt his head just a little bit. And with the polygon, we get a little bit of the side of the head, but not much, because we're going to be seeing most of the character from the front. But we can still give them eyes, so we know the direction that he's looking. And I want him looking just a little bit sideways, and we're going to cock his head just a little bit so that it's not just straight on to the viewer. But I'm not going to put a bunch of details into this because we're talking about mostly the rudimentary parts of the action figure. Dressing up and putting on the costume is really just the details once you get the anatomy down. So Batman has a similar shape to Superman, who's a similar shape to so many other superheroes that have a muscular, athletic build. So in this particular drawing, we're going to do a little bit more of a dynamic angle, and we're going to put his shoulders across here, and his neck is underneath. And so I'm going to make this round, but I'm going to make this over here again, we're going to make this one kind of angular. And you as the artist can decide, well, what is going to be more comfortable for you as you're drawing. So we know that the lead shoulder here is going to be bigger than the shoulder behind, and you're not going to see much of this shoulder back here. This is just the tops of the shoulders that are coming across where he is. So this is just square coming across, and you can draw it as a cylinder if you want. That's the shoulders, and then you can say, okay, well, there's going to be another square here on top. And you don't always have to draw the lines that are behind it. But if you want the shoulders to change up and square differently, then you can rotate so that you always know the direction of what that item is going. And we want his arm coming in front, and we want him to have him holding a sword. So we're going to put his hand out here, and he's going to be holding a sword. But there's going to be a little bit of foreshortening. And foreshortening is an object coming towards the viewer. And so we're going to put a sword in his hand that's going to be coming across here. But for the moment, I'm going to focus on this hand a little bit, and I'm just going to real lightly indicate he's got his knuckles, he's holding his sword, part of his thumb comes out here. But if I'm drawing this one as more of the polygons, we're going to draw it more of like, it's always going to be a series of small squares because we're trying to stay away from the round part. Whereas here, everything's shaped kind of more like oranges. Now, as the forearm comes across, it's blocking part of the arm that's back behind. So we see more of the forearm. And because this is a cylinder, you can draw part of the wrist coming behind if you want. And now it's starting to take shape a little bit. But here as a polygon, we're just going to draw it more square, and it comes across here, and it angles down. There's more, it's wider as it gets back towards the elbow part. And then we've got to bring the bicep part. It's also its own square that's here. And so we want to draw that one connected. Now later on, if I draw big muscles on this guy, I can add the round part. But I just want to see, is this going to work as a pose for this character? And a lot of time when you're drawing these polygons and spheres, you really can almost see the structure that you've drawn behind it. In a sense, you're drawing it transparent, almost like we're seeing through the body. And again, I can draw more or less muscles. Those are all just details that are added onto the arm. And if you need to lengthen something, you can draw more of that. You can say, well, I want it coming more towards the viewer, or I want it to be back. Later on, we can add the details. If he's got a sword coming off of his back, or if he's got a gun, we can add those simple details. But those are all just filler. That doesn't really affect the figure itself. But we can see the different approach here starting to take shape of cylinders versus polygons. So this, we're going to bring the torso back behind him. And this is part of the chest. And I usually, and a lot of artists, will usually draw a big portion here where the pecs are. And I'll use circles over here, and we'll use straight lines here for the polygons. So we can kind of see where the chest comes across. And then this here, little V kind of shape, this is the clavicle. This is the collarbone. And so we know where stuff is starting to connect. Now, because his body is turned towards us and he's got his shoulder back here, we're not going to see much of this other arm because we're going to give him a gun in his hand, but it's going to be pretty obscured. So we can kind of have the hand back here, and we'll draw this one as the sort of polygon that's flat, and we'll just indicate real quickly part of the figures. He can have his trigger finger there, kind of holding up in the air. And a lot of this is going to go behind his body for the foreshortening. He's going to be blocked by his torso. So we got to put his hand back here for the round one. That's the circles. And again, just trying to keep everything more circular. He's got his thumb coming across here. He's holding part of a gun. And all of the details can be worked out later on if a finger ends up looking too big. But if I was doing this sort of full speed, if you will, and not for a demonstration, it might be a lot faster, and I might explore different poses before I get too far into the drawing. So right now he's looking a little thick because we can't see the bottom of the torso at all. So if we kind of bring in part of the his back and his ribs, which come in through here, I almost always like to indicate the rib cage as it comes under. And sometimes people will even draw the spine as it comes down in the back. So, this kind of slims up the figure a little bit more as we're starting to bring the torso in. And we know that we're going to put a sword in this hand. So we can come over here real quickly and draw the sword. He's going to have a katana since he's Snake Eyes. And so a little bit of curve to that. And we're seeing how this is all working for our figure. But right now he looks like he could be just standing there because we haven't drawn the legs, which in an action pose can really make the difference between, is this guy just standing, peeking around a corner, or is he actually going to be jumping through the air? And we want to make this character a lot more action oriented, and it doesn't really matter his gun here. We can just go ahead and indicate that he's got a machine gun or part of his thing. Could be a grappling hook gun. Doesn't have to be a gun itself. But indicate that he's holding this item up here. But we want to make him so obviously that it's more of an action-oriented pose. So I like it when there's kind of like one longer leg and one shorter leg. And I've explored a little bit of that up here. Like one is kind of up and then one is kind of down. Looks like you're kind of jumping through the air. So if we bring over here and we say, well, this polygon has got to be the big part of his leg, but it's going to be shorter, and we're going to put his knee here, but then we're going to bring this other leg down and over. Now he's already starting to move quite a bit more. And we can kind of angle the leg here. Now we could kick one leg down underneath to see it more, or we could just make part of this leg disappear. And so we have the big part of the quads here, and he can have lots of goodies on his leg, strapped onto his leg because he's Snake Eyes. So we're going to indicate where roughly his knee is. And because this one's farther down, we know that this leg is down and we're seeing more of it. Whereas if this leg is bigger, this knee, and it's coming towards the viewer, then the foreshortening is starting to happen for us. And we're still drawing it as polygons, which is our squares. And then we're going to bring this leg all the way down underneath so that he's kind of running or jumping, probably more like jumping. So if we make sure that that he's not touching the ground and that the ground is nowhere to be seen, in other words, a shadow not under him, then that's going to look more like an action pose. And so a lot of times when I'm drawing in the more of we'll call it the round way here, I'll actually indicate, see how I'm putting kind of like bands around it. And then I know that that's the amount of curve of that leg. So as this leg comes down here, and it's also the sort of cylinders, and we have our knee, and then we have the shin coming down here, and then the foot coming off of it, that we know he's either jumping or he's landing down into the actual action itself. And so with this one here, I want to really have a lot of this leg go away, because I don't want it to come down and interfere with this other leg, because it might look like his legs are crossed. So I'm going to make a fair amount of his knee as it's coming towards us. I'm going to make a lot of the shin and the lower part of the leg just sort of disappear. And you can just make that darker so that it goes into shadow. And then you can, depending on how much foot and how big you draw the foot, it depends on how far back it is. And so we could angle the foot where it's more down like it is here, or we could have the foot coming more straight out. And so as the artist, you have to decide how much of that is going to be shown. And so now we've got just an indication of the foot and the leg, and we can start adding straps and cool stuff. He can have a gun and a side holster. And so now he's actually starting to look like he's kind of jumping a bit. So as we come over here to our polygonal guy, we can do the same sort of thing, but you're just, keep with your squares and then say, well, what if you didn't draw quite as much foot? What if there was even less feet showing? Then it looks like the foot is farther back. But if it looks too stubby, then you just look at it and go, oh, okay. Yeah, we really need to see more of that. So if he has a knee pad on because he's snake eyes, then I can still draw this like a polygon with straps, but maybe the foot angles down a little more, and we still see part of it, but it's kind of turned more towards this way. If it looks unnatural because you're changing directions too much, this direction versus this direction, then it might look like the foot is too curved. But we can get away with a lot of kind of foreshortening things when we work in superhero comics because it's not necessarily sort of real life. So now we've got kind of a similar thing here where we're dropping the foot back and we're keeping the focus on this part. This is the part up here that we want people looking at. And so this part here, it's all important, but it's not the main focus part of the piece of art. So we've still got two different approaches there, and we've got the other leg coming down here. So we can still indicate, notice I still put the little bands of circles around. Then later on, if I need to erase them, I can if it's not in the right place. And I think one of the problems that a lot of artists run into today is they think that they need expensive iPads and all these digital tools and expensive programs like Photoshop and all that sort of thing. And most of your comic book artists who are very successful today all draw with traditional tools. That way they can sketch for fans at conventions like Comic-Con, and they know how to have command of those tools, and they're not afraid to make mistakes and erase and things. They don't need the undo button, so to speak. So a little bit of advice for some of the younger artists out there. Don't worry about all this digital kind of stuff. If you want to be successful in comics, you really should have command of traditional tools. And a pencil, which costs a few dollars, and paper, which just costs a few cents, is really the least expensive way to go. And you can always carry it with you in a backpack. You can always draw. And the difference is that when you're done with a traditional piece of art or drawing, you always have something to show for it that is a real piece of art that you can sell. And if you do your art only on the computer, all you ever have is just a file. And the only thing you can make with it is a man-made reproduction, a print, if you will, that'll always have to come off of a computer, and it'll never be considered original art, like something like this. And that's why most of your original art that's very valuable, such as the Mona Lisa or maybe early Superman art, things like that, what collectors want is the ability for the artist to create art by hand. So as we're finishing up this sample where we're showing the use of polygons, again, if I want this need to look like it's aimed down or aimed up, I can just change the direction that it's facing so that we know where it's going and what the foot is doing. And it's really just up to you what the proper method is, if one appeals to you more than the other. Now, there's a big difference. If I put the ground right under this guy's foot, he looks like he's running. But for some reason, if there's speed lines coming off of this guy that are behind him, and the ground is down here on the bottom where the shadow is, suddenly this guy's in the air and this guy isn't. And so it makes a difference, some of the elements that you see and how you integrate your action character into your art. Something as simple as where the ground is can make a very large difference. Or if there was a door back here and this was a hallway, as long as it was keeping with how your character is moving through the scene, then you can have sort of speed lines and directionality, and this might guide you to what your character is doing. Now, if we draw a wall right here, this guy looks like he's running down the hallway, and we have part of our hallway, and maybe we have a door down here, and even if you added some bad guys that were just a silhouette, or he's being chased or running away, by having a corner here and having him look this direction, this guy suddenly looks like he's running down the hallway and he's right on the tip and he's making a power move and he's probably going to go around the corner. And if it's as simple as really making him look around the corner, then we move his whole face over to see a lot less of that side of it, and we show the side of his head where his ears are, and we move his whole face over here, and now he's really looking in the direction that he's going. And now, very simply, we've made him look around the corner as far as he's going. And the exact same corner, the exact same character, if we switch the head all the way the other direction, and we don't see hardly any of it at all, and if this was his ear and the back of his head, and we only saw part of his cheek and part of his head, now we know that he's looking back over his shoulder and he's looking the other direction, because simply we're seeing the back of his head here. We've got his ears, maybe he's wearing a helmet, and we only see the side of his face, the cheek, and that sort of thing. And now he's looking backwards. So simple changes like that to where the character is looking, and I'm sure there's probably some other great demonstrations where people are doing like action dynamics of the characters that's more on purely just expressions. You know, we haven't delved very deeply into expressions here. If we change the expression of the character to suddenly has an open mouth and he's screaming, and the brows are very furrowed and we see barely any of the eyes. Suddenly this guy is, screaming around the corner or carrying his gun, about to jump into battle. Whereas here, this is an action piece where the character is jumping, and if we make him Snake Eyes and we just draw the visor that we're used to kind of seeing on Snake Eyes, suddenly he looks more of like the ninja character, but he's not necessarily screaming into battle like this guy over here who has the kind of open mouth. This guy to me looks like he could be more like RoboCop or something, whereas this looks more of like how I picture Snake Eyes to be. So this is a good pose for me to take to the next level for Snake Eyes, and we'll do a more detailed drawing. And so what I might do is draw this slightly more detailed, transfer it to a larger piece of art, and then bring that into a more detailed rendering so that I can submit that rendering to the client or whoever the publisher is, to get them approve the idea that I have for my art. Now, very seldom do they want to see any of this work, but they might want to see thumbnail sketches for an entire concept. So if I have that drawing right above and I want to draw the concept for what I might show the publisher, well, then I would just draw out what I think the front page might be and roughly make it obviously the shape of a comic book, which is kind of a taller, skinnier kind of a rectangle. And we already have a pose that I kind of like here, but I think it would be interesting to have some other elements. I don't want to just have a cover with just Snake Eyes on it. I want it to tell a little bit of a visual story of who the bad guy is or who he might be facing. So we're going to do more of what I call the montage. And a montage or a collage is when you have different elements that all come together to make up a scene, but they don't have to fight each other. In other words, there might be bigger heads and things. So if you think of a movie poster like Harry Potter or Star Wars or any of these, you might have Dumbledore in the background, and then you might have Harry and Hermione in the front, and then maybe there's chocolate frogs or some magic going on. So if we have some different elements that we know we want to bring into our cover, So we're going to have Snake Eyes, and he's our G.I. Joe guy, and we want him to be in an action pose. And these are just notes that I might have in there. But I also want to have Cobra Commander because he's our bad guy. So we know that he's going to face off or try to take down the main bad guy that says, oh, wow, this is very G.I. Joe. And to me, G.I. Joe, he fights on land, sea, and air. But maybe we're not going to incorporate all of that. So I might take notes and say, okay, well, we could have, broke my pencil. Could have helicopters, could have tanks, or could have boats, right? So we got land, sea, and air. And I'm thinking that since we got Snake Eyes, and he's more of a ground guy, and we're not doing a lot of things with in the air, and I'm going to have him in the air, then maybe it's better to have an element down at the bottom. So I'm going to choose tanks. So now I know I got Snake Eyes and I want tanks, but it still might be cool to bring in an element of this. So if I see, well, okay, helicopters would be cool, but I don't want it to compete with Snake Eyes. What if, to bring in an air element, what if I had Snake Eyes parachuting? And because I've already got this cool kind of sketch up here, and he looks like he's jumping, I might experiment with the fact that what happens if it looks like these lines, which are speed lines, could actually be the lines from a parachute. And Snake Eyes could be up in the corner, and he could be parachuting in. And as a composition, these big, strong lines bring your eye right towards the viewer. So we've got a strong V compositional element, and now Snake Eyes is parachuting into the action. And if you look at the continuation of these lines, this one comes all the way through the figure, and this one continues his leg. So these V shapes create this really nice X, and it keeps a focal point right on my main guy, because Snake Eyes is kind of like the focus of this, but I'm also going to have some other elements. So I'm going to move that back up a little bit so I can just see it above. So I like the idea that he's parachuting. That's going to work for me. So I'm going to start out by just, since we call this a thumbnail, even though it's bigger. And I kind of want him, I don't want to put stuff right in the middle of my composition, right? That's a bad idea because then it just creates a bullseye. So I'm going to put elements in different quadrants. So I've decided that I'm going to have Snake Eyes kind of be up here, and I want him parachuting into the action. So I'm going to redraw just real quickly. It's not very detailed. He's got his gun. He's holding his gun up here just like we drew in our other thing. But now I'm working with composition. So I've got the hand. I've got the shoulder. He's got his sword. We drew one knee and leg up. His leg was coming down a little bit. His foot was out. And then this leg was kind of coming down a little bit. And so now I've got an element up here in the upper right. And I've saved some room for the title. I haven't put him up so high that we can't put G.I. Joe across here, because as an artist, this is going to be a cover, right? We want to have Snake Eyes up here in the upper quadrant. This is his legs. You can see I draw pretty fast if I'm just concepting about whether this is going to work as an element. Now, I don't want everything to be the same size as this character. So if I was to put Cobra Commander's head back here really large, we know that he's so big that he doesn't exist that way in real life. So if this was his mask, a little bit like you would Darth Vader, like he has a kind of a reflective face mask, and you put just his head, part of his collar, and then this could be his shoulder kind of coming out towards the thing. We immediately know that this composition is going to be a montage, because now we have sort of big head, right? And so this is going to be Cobra Commander, and we've got Snake Eyes over here, SE. So now, but now I've got some other space to deal with, and it's not very dynamic yet. And so I'm like, okay, well, how are we going to make this look more G.I. Joe? Well, we know I want some tanks, and we're not going to put tanks up here in the middle. But this is a great area down here to have some tanks, and they could all be kind of thundering in. And usually you want to put, as a design element, I was always taught, usually elements like this, you want 3 of them rather than 4. Or if you do have other numbers, you want certain elements to be smaller. So if I have a big explosion or a bunch of dust being kicked up from my tanks, then here I could just have some tanks thundering in, and it's starting to feel like kind of G.I. Joe-ish, right? But I'm still missing another element. I want something over here, because this area, this sort of quadrant, we have tanks here, we have Cobra Commander here, we have Snake Eyes here, but we don't have anything in this, excuse me, in this lower quadrant. And so we already have a male character and a female character that could be a bad character, or not bad, but villainous. Baroness is probably a good choice for one of the characters, and then that way it balances out. You know, right now this is all kind of like masculinity. We got ninjas and bad guys and tanks, but let's have a female character, and we know we want her to be kind of more vertical, because if I put a crouching character down here that was like this first pose up here, she might compete with the tanks if I have the leg kicked out and she's crouched down and she's right over here. It might look like these tanks are going to run over her. So I want to make sure that she doesn't look like she exists in the same scene. She needs to be her own thing. So if I draw her in a different scale than anything here, and we're still not obstructing too much of the tanks coming in, we could have her almost kind of like leaning against this side over here. And she could have a gun up here by her face. And then I think, well, you know, Snake Eyes, he's already got a gun up by his face. So maybe that's not as good an idea. So we'll just kind of draw part of the female figure. And I could draw her in any number of outfits. It could be more of her dark leather warrior outfit, or she could look more like a spy. But we want her to be a little more demure. So I'm going to say, at least for the moment, that her guns are down by her side, because it's a little bit different than him, which is jumping into action. So this is the character that uses, you know, seduction and beauty more to infiltrate, because she's an assassin, but she's also a spy. So now I've got something going on in each of the quadrants. I've got a number of different sizes. I've got kind of an action element here, but it's also not so complex that I'm losing focus of my characters that are telling a story. And if these are all drawn in a pretty accurate and interesting way, then this cover could be intriguing enough to say, okay, looks like Snake Eyes is jumping into the action. Baroness is over here. Maybe those two are going to fight in the comic. We know that Cobra Commander has some sort of ulterior plans. We've left room for the logos, and yet we've got this very G.I. Joe element here. And then once I add in, I almost forgot we were going to do, he's kind of parachuting in, and so we've got this kind of V shape. And I don't really need to include the whole parachute, just the straps coming off of it. And so that gives us the dynamic of these kind of powerful X kind of shapes, because he's going to be looking down at her, or she's going to be looking up at him. And then the tanks are coming in like they're coming towards her. So our eye is continually brought into the scene, and it's not leaving and going out. If I had had him kicking outwards, we might be losing our composition, and we want to keep the viewer's eyes here in the focal area, but we don't want it to be dead center. We want it to be in this sort of more like rule of thirds, in areas where it's not smack dab in the middle. For this part of the demo, I have redrawn the thumbnail sketch that we saw earlier in the demonstration, and now I'm doing a much more detailed Snake Eyes illustration in pencil that's part of the sketch that I will go ahead and submit to the fine folks over at IDW who this G.I. Joe cover is for. So with this closer up view, you can see that I've taken pretty light lines, and I've gone ahead and this drawing probably took closer to an hour, and I've done a very sped up time lapse for you just to see the details being drawn in with a traditional mechanical pencil into the larger, more detailed drawing. Now, it's still not super detailed. It's not to the type of level where I would be making a published illustration from this, but this is the sketch that I will go ahead and submit to them for approval. So you can see Snake Eyes is drawn in. Here the details are coming in for Cobra Commander, and then now I'm moving into the details on Baroness's face. And just real quickly, knocking in the details. They know that this will be a full color painting once it's complete, and they'll be able to have a pretty good idea of the idea that I have, and then they will get back to me with any changes in the overall illustration. All right, this concludes the demonstration for today in the Comic-Con at Home panel with myself, Monty Michael Moore, and we can get to see a little bit of the finished art. This is the fully concepted sketch that I will go ahead and send to the G.I. Joe folks for a wraparound cover featuring a lot of different characters in a montage style of action comics art. So thank you everybody for watching. Hopefully you learned stuff from our concept sketches on how to draw out and maximize the action of the character, and that you all have a wonderful and safe summer. And remember, expect more.